Hi, thanks for joining us today for what is episode 4 of the MotorServ UK TV series, which is now also a podcast available on Spotify and all other platforms. Today I'm very pleased to welcome John Marcar, who has agreed to come and be our guest for today's interview. John Marcar has been a key figure in the automotive industry for the past 15 years and has enjoyed a vast career in the field of journalism, PR, content creation and presenting. John was the Gumball 3000 event coordinator from 2012, which was a global project all the way up until 2015. John's media career has seen him as a host and presenter on Talk Radio and Talk Sport, and he's a regular face on television showing his opinion on breaking news and developing automotive news stories. These days, John is the face and voice of the Driven and the Driven Chat podcast, an automotive media website, YouTube channel and weekly podcast, which is enjoyed by hundreds of thousands of listeners around the world. John has also been a director of a company called Classic Brand Touring during his career. If there is a car or motorbike that you can think of, from pre-war Bentleys to all the modern day hypercars, chances are John has driven one and he's also reviewed one. So please welcome John to MotorServ UK. See you, how you doing? I'm alright, you okay?
Good, yeah, good, thank you.
Excellent, grab a seat.
Thank you.
So, welcome again, John. Thanks very much for being here today. You live in the Midlands, don't you? So you've come from, is it Stratford?
That's absolutely right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Midlands is home. Home for me is London, southwest London, little borough called Merton, most famous for Wimbledon. But yeah, I've been up here in the West Midlands now for a good few years. Moved up to do a little work project and stayed. So here I am.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You preferred our tasting water?
Yes, something like that. Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. No, it's good to have you in the Midlands. So at least you haven't had to come far today.
No, not far at all.
Yeah. Excellent. So I've tried in the intro to obviously introduce you as best I could. I have followed your videos for a while now, and when you actually mentioned some of the stuff you've done, I actually record that I've seen you on it before. So it's like, yeah, so I was quite starstruck when you agreed to come down. So
You're too kind.
yeah, thank you very much. And it's great to meet you in person and to have you here today. So thank you very much. So in the intro, there's a lot of stuff. The intro is quite long. So yeah, you guys have watched all that and you've gone through it. But is there anything I missed? Is there anything that you're up to now? Or is there anything that...
Oh, I don't think so. You're right, though. There is a lot. There's a lot to try and capture into a short space of time, isn't there? But yes, in and around the automotive industry now, in various aspects, from a media creation side to a PR side to an event side, I'm sure we'll get to it all. And all of it still crops up here and there. So whilst I might think of myself predominantly as more of a journalist and presenter now, occasionally I'll still get called in to give support or ideas for events and PR activation, that sort of stuff. But that's what I love about it. It's all cars, always cars and motorcycles. Everything's automotive, and it keeps me very busy.
Excellent. And so, because we mentioned like you've been doing it for 15 years. What were you doing before that? How did you did you fall into it, or yeah?
It was an interesting one. I guess a classic example of not wanting to know, or not knowing what I want to be when I grow up, and I probably still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I left school and left college without any plan, really.
Yeah.
I had no real aspiration to work in a particular field. If I was a lot more intelligent, maybe I would have been a doctor, but I'm not, so that didn't work out. Always had a passion with cars, so knew that perhaps some way there'd be an association with cars in my career, but again, had no idea what that would be. So for me, I actually went into property, started doing bits and pieces in the world of property. Then that sort of morphed into travel and tourism. And then through sheer intrigue, myself and a few friends, we decided to start a very small events company, organising track days. So hiring circuits like Brands Hatch or Silverstone, and selling spaces from those days to our friends to drive on track days. That's what we did. We started doing that, and a little light bulb at that point turned on in my head and thought, well, actually, this is this is nice. I get to work with cars, I get to work with people, I get to see some exciting circuits. We started going further afield over to the Nürburgring in Germany and various circuits around France. And it all at that point started to come together, but there hasn't really ever been a timeline, so to speak, of what I'm working to, a schedule of where I'm heading. It's all just kind of come together through meeting the right people at the right times and learning on the job, learning on my feet, and going from there, really.
Fantastic. So did that kind of, because obviously you mentioned that one of your breaks was the Gumball 3000.
Yeah.
Did the track stuff lead to that, or was that?
Ultimately, it did. Yeah. Organising events, small scale events, really small, really, and then getting involved purely again through meeting the right people in the right places, wanting support with events that they were putting on, and that could be something to do with a car manufacturer. It could be a magazine. That was a good one that came up. People needing help and support with ideas, or just an extra driver here and there, you know, somebody to help get a car from one location to another, to help film a car, to help review a car. With the time that I had running the track day company, I improved my own driving ability. I was taught by a fantastic group of instructors, which then enabled me to teach others how to drive on track. And then that, again, just led into more opportunities. Suddenly I was able to drive a car that was being photographed or filmed and do so dynamically, you know, send the back end of the car out, or make the car look more exciting than perhaps it is. So that sequence of events was just always unfolding, and there was always something new that would crop up. With regards to Gumball, that was again a real stroke of luck, I'd say, a combination of luck and a combination of knowing the right people. And it was a friend of mine who had done some work in the magazine industry. He'd previously been associated with Gumball 3000, had gone back to do a bit of work with them, and as he went in, the managing director, Maximilian Cooper, said, "Oh, by the way, whilst you're here, we're looking for a new events guy." And that was that. I got a phone call to say, "You need to get yourself down to Notting Hill. There's somebody that really wants to meet you, somebody worth talking to." And again, that was it. As far as I was concerned, on that day going in, I was going to meet somebody else in the car world that was interested and had a passion around cars and wanted to put on a really cool event. And that's exactly what it was. So I went in the end of 2012, was fairly sure I was going to stick around for a year at the most, because it's an intense event. The Gumball Rally is a really, really intense event. And right up until the end of my very first rally, which was 2013, so that was Copenhagen to Monaco, I remember finishing the rally in Monaco and thinking, right, I'm glad I've done this, but that's me done. I have no interest in doing this again, because it was hectic. It was so stressful. It's a huge production to put on. But then what ended up happening was I got home after the event. I started looking at the media coverage. I was looking at it on the news. I was looking at website articles. I was looking at all the photos on social media. And this other little light bulb turned in my head that said, "Oh, you did that, and you could do it again next year." So I did. I ended up doing that for another few years. So yeah, right up to 2015. So I personally looked after the Copenhagen to Monaco rally in 2013, Miami to Ibiza in 7 days. That was 2014, and then my final rally was Stockholm to Vegas in 2015.
Fantastic. Because when was that televised? Was that because there was a TV show that was made around it, wasn't it?
Yes, there have been a number of them. In the time that I was there, we didn't quite have the glory years, so a lot of people will know about the Jackass series that did it early 2000s. Since then, it's been covered by various different people. There have been dedicated videos that have gone out each year from each event, and those have been selling. They still sell now DVDs of the actual event, which is bonkers when you think about it. Really, it is just a big road trip. But the people that it attracts, the celebrities, the drivers, the cars, and of course the locations that we were going to, it made a real spectacle. So naturally people always wanted to see it and learn more about it.
Yeah, because that was, I bet you got to meet a lot of people on those.
Yes, some amazing people. Yeah.
As you mentioned, the celebrities, the characters, the people that were coming on there, it was like, that was the attraction of the TV shows, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. It became this, I mean, the infancy of the brand, Max, who was running it, he was in the fashion industry, and at the time that he set it up in the late 1990s, he was rubbing shoulders with really interesting people in the world of popular culture and fashion, and essentially said to them, "Look, I'm putting on this event, come and get involved." And at that point, it was just a road trip. They started driving in London, they went down to the south of France, and that was it. But of course, because you had those high-profile names, suddenly everyone else is looking, going, "Oh, I want to be involved in that." And that just snowballed. It kept going year on year. So, over the years that I was there, I was, sharing car journeys with all sorts of people, from David Hasselhoff through to Exhibit, through to everyone in between. It was some real surreal moments, sitting in a Nissan GTR outside a hotel in Barcelona, trying to teach David Hasselhoff how to tune in his sat-nav in his GTR. It's, moments like that I'll cherish. It's a bizarre
Awesome.
time.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Because that was, I got attracted to that because it was just so bizarre and there's so much stuff going on. And I think because that's inspired because we, as a family, we do a lot of road trips across Europe, and we're going to Monaco this summer.
Fantastic.
I wanted to do the drive across, down to south of France. So and I've been saying to my wife, so it's definitely, and it's inspired by you guys on the Gumball.
Oh, brilliant.
But not quite as glam.
Well, if you need some routes, let me know. I've got loads.
Oh, I bet you got the best routes, the fastest routes as well. Yeah, excellent. So, like, you obviously talked about the journalism and how you kind of ended up in that, but have you worked in the motor trade itself ever? Have you ever been kind of...
Do you know, interestingly, I always thought from a young age I would. My dad, when I was very small, was a mechanic by trade. He was then a Snap-on tools dealer. In fact, even to this day, he's refusing to retire, bless him. He's still working in the motor trade now. So I always assumed as a youngster without a plan that my world into cars was going to involve workshops or technician role of some variety. My dad actually begged me not to do it, interestingly, because I think back in, this now would have been sort of early to mid 2000s, as I was at that age of thinking about what I wanted to do, leaving school and college. He at the time was under the assumption that the automotive industry was going to become a very difficult place to work as a technician. Everything was getting a bit more complicated with computers and ECUs. And perhaps he was a bit ahead of himself. I think he was maybe 10, 15 years ahead of himself. But he really dissuaded me from that. He said, I'll support you in anything you want to do, from nursing to architecture to whatever. Do whatever you want to do, but please don't do cars. So I didn't. And interestingly, one of my closest friends, a friend of mine that I've known since we were both toddlers, he did the opposite. He did go into the motor trade. And of course, as you do, at the kind of age of 17, 18, you get your first cars, and both of us had little classic minis. And I used to get really excited because I'd finish my office job, day job, get home from work, and I'd want to tinker with my car. Whereas my good friend Will, who'd been at work all day servicing London taxis, the last thing he wanted to do when he got home was work on his own car. So no, I haven't, other than a little bit of, interestingly, some PR management I did for a brand based in East London, which was a workshop, but that was mainly a kind of modification workshop. Think West Coast Customs come to London. It was that kind of thing. That's the closest I ever got. So that was the only time I was, I guess, in inverted commas, in a work environment that was a workshop.
Until today.
Until today, yeah.
Excellent. So your dad told you to avoid motor trade.
Yeah.
So you kind of did, but then you kind of swerved straight back into it, about on the media.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. It was destined to happen. It's in the blood. And I think when you grow up with a parent who is passionate about something, you end up inheriting that passion. So for me, it was always destined to happen in some way, and I'm very glad it happened the way that it has done. No, and he was very great. Yeah, he was great with me, because I remember him saying, if you want to learn mechanics, I'll teach you everything you need to know about mechanics. I'll teach you how to fix the car. Just don't do it as a job, please. Yeah,
fix your own car.
Yeah, exactly.
Not other people's.
Yeah.
But no, you're right though, because I've got 3 sons, and they're all automatically, like, they know every brand, they know every car, they're down here all the time. They're just they're already infatuated by cars.
Yeah.
And I haven't had much of an influence, but I think I have. But no, brilliant. So I've seen loads of your reviews online. There's a lot obviously on there. And I saw one of your latest ones, obviously. I know that you bought a Defender recently, and you're going to be looking, we'll talk about it in a sec, but one of my all-time favourite cars, I like big luxury cars.
Yeah.
I've got quite lazy, so I've got Driver 7 Series. So when you did that video on the Bentley Mulsanne, it's really sad that they stopped making that car now. And it's, and it's the last big barge of a Bentley, proper 6.75 litre, all the rest of it. Are there any others? Yeah, because that car's obviously quite special, but has there been anything recently or anything that stood out? Or
it is an interesting one. I too have had this bizarre fascination with large, luxurious cars. I don't know where it's come from. It's, for me, as somebody that started my world in automotive, driving little sports cars, think Mazda MX-5s and BMW M3s, trying to get the most out of them on a track, on a track day environment, to suddenly transition into a big luxurious barge doesn't seem to make much sense. But there is something about a big luxurious barge that I just can't help but be attracted to. The Mulsanne, as you mentioned, that was a great example of a car that I genuinely felt quite sad that it had come to the end of its life. And I spoke to the team at Bentley, the press and PR team, and said, look, I know you have a fleet of historic cars. Have you got a Mulsanne? And if you have, can I drive one? And it's an interesting question to ask a press office, because ultimately a press office exists to provide cars that the brand will then sell. They're not selling any Mulsannes because, of course, they don't make them anymore. But they were very gracious and gave me a car for a week. And yeah, what a wonderful thing. The 6 3/4 litre, if we have to be all Bentley about it, that engine was just amazing. And to think that that engine's been around since the 1950s and just been refined a little bit right up to this point, and is even inspired a lot of the engine builds for the later Bentley models in the Volkswagen Group with the new turbo V8 engines. It's a really, really significant car. With regards to other cars, I mean, interestingly, keeping under the Bentley umbrella, I did review the follow-on car. So that, of course, the Mulsanne was the flagship car for Bentley, to then later be replaced by the Bentayga, which to me was a little bit sacrilegious. You know, to replace a limousine with what is ultimately an SUV seemed a bit crazy. But I, again, phoned up the press office at Bentley and said, look, I know that's the replacement. Can I have a go? Let me see if my preconceptions are justified. But frustratingly, I actually really enjoyed it.
Really?
A lot more than I thought I would, yeah. A fantastic car, really, really diverse, the ability to do everything. Yeah, really quite a special thing. I think Bentley just get it right. They really do know how to make a good car.
Yeah, definitely. Was that the extended wheelbase version?
It was,
It was, okay, so a proper one, as replacing the Mulsanne.
Absolutely. A bit of a nightmare to park, but other than that, a really nice place to be.
I suppose a Mulsanne, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It's very much a first world problem.
5.5 metres long, was it? Yeah. So basically extra long wheelbase is standard.
Yes, that's it, yeah.
Excellent. No, brilliant. So I saw that you guys, one of your latest videos, you've bought a Defender as an everyday daily car.
Yeah.
How's that faring?
Really well, yeah. It was a bit of an interesting choice. So we had a couple of, at Driven, we had a couple of Mercedes GLCs that we'd been using, which were great as cars, but weren't really what I would describe as a car person's car. It wasn't much of a talking point. It's just a nice Mercedes, a nice place to be. The cars that we had there, they came to the end of their cycle with the lease, and we decided to replace it. And we had this fascinating discussion in the office of what on earth do we replace our daily car with? So we went through the list of, do we want it to be a sports car? Do we want it to be something a bit more utilitarian, something we can use for filming? And we ended up narrowing down a Defender, but the one that we bought is actually a commercial. So ultimately it's a van. Front seats only, it's a 110, loads of space in the back, which means that because of the productions that we film, if we're doing car reviews or if we're filming on behalf of other brands, we can load the back up full of gear and take it to all different locations. But we're also planning to make that a bit of a project car as well. So we're going to do things like swapping the wheels, maybe changing the colour. Being a commercial, it is front seats only, but you can put the rear seats in. So we are kind of toying with the idea of doing that, just trying to work out the kind of legal complications of what you can do and who you need to tell and what brackets you need to change, because we want to do it all by the book. But yeah, it's a fun thing, and as a daily driver, it's just such a lovely place to be. I really like them. I never got on with the old Defender. I think they look really cool, but I don't really fit in them. They're always a bit agricultural, a bit uncomfortable to drive. The new one, I'm sorry, classic Land Rover fans, it's just a better car in every single way. It really is. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Fantastic. So the car market in general, obviously we're going through a lot of changes at the moment, and like the fuel changes that we're going through, and obviously with all the COVID patterns of late. Firstly, the fuel debate. You've test driven a lot of electric cars. Yep. But you chose a Defender.
Yes.
Diesel.
I know. Yeah. 3 litre diesel.
Are we there yet with electric cars? Would you buy one?
Would I buy one? No, I wouldn't. For the simple reason that at the moment in the house that I live in, I don't have the availability to plug in a car at home. So for me, it becomes a real issue. I would have to rely on the public charging infrastructure. And I think that sadly is where we're falling short as a nation. Unless you're driving a Tesla, because of course every service station has a bank of Tesla charging pods. That's great, but would I want to drive a Tesla? Probably not. It's a really, really interesting time, isn't it? Because of course we are edging towards this time where we're going to be told we can no longer go into a showroom and buy an exclusively petrol or diesel powered car. And I don't know if I am as excited about the electrification of cars yet. I'm sure it will get better, and I'm sure that infrastructure will get better. But I feel at the moment, whilst there is still a market for petrol and diesel cars, especially given the fact that new petrol and diesel cars, they are so economical and they are way better for the environment. Even 10 years ago, we were looking at cars that were really bad for the world. Suddenly, thanks to modern technology, modern engineering, we're able to produce petrol and diesel cars that really aren't that bad for the environment. And of course, there's the whole bigger picture to EVs. I'm not going to sit here and wave the flag for either petrol or diesel or EV, but it is worth noting that it's important people do their research and find out truthfully what the actual environmental impact of EVs is, the cost of producing those batteries, the carbon footprint that goes into producing those batteries. What happens then if we buy our brand new EV and we get nudged into at a junction, suddenly there's a likelihood that the whole car is going to be written off because there is a slight possibility that we've damaged the battery. That can't be good for the environment, to suddenly put that brand new car that's generated 20 plus tons of carbon dioxide to be built, then immediately goes and sits in a scrapyard to make way for another one. I feel like perhaps we've started to run a little bit too soon before we've really mastered walking. And I will be genuinely fascinated to see what happens long term. We're starting to see synthetic fuels being generated. I'm under no illusion it's not going to be an overnight success, but that may change the way that we look at cars in the future. It's an interesting time, but would I have one myself? Probably not just yet.
Yeah, it's interesting because I get a mixed reaction to that, especially from people within the motor industry, within the motoring press. But I wouldn't have one either right now. And it's largely around, I think you said that word, rely on public. You can't at this stage, and I think that's the main problem at the moment, isn't it?
Absolutely. It works perfectly for many people. I think something like the average car journey is 30 miles, and the average commute is slightly less. So for the vast majority of people, an EV works. And if you've got somewhere to charge it at work, even better. If you've got somewhere to charge it at home, perfect. If you don't, and occasionally you do need to do a long journey, for me, this morning, for example, I started my day in Bristol. Tomorrow I'm driving down to London. Day after that, I'm driving up to Lincolnshire. For me, it wouldn't work for me to rely on the electric infrastructure, because I'd be adding maybe an hour, 2, 3 to each day to make sure that I've got to a service point where I can then plug in. Is it going to be available? Is the charging point going to be working? Is there going to be a queue of 9 cars already waiting to plug in? It, for me, just doesn't quite work yet.
Yeah, no, that's it. You kind of touched upon it, but because obviously we're all hoping that Porsche can develop that synthetic fuel and that they can get it working. But it's that noise. A lot of people are, they love the thrill of the engine, the revving of the engine, the noise, the exhilaration, everything that it gives you. And electric cars are just,
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation. It's a really interesting debate, because you're right, driving a car, especially a sports car or a supercar, it's a sensory experience. You want to be able to feel what the car's doing, in addition to how the car looks, how the car performs, how it drives. The sound of a car, especially if it's got a special engine, and Porsche is a perfect example. Think of those wonderful Metzger engines that went into the GT3s, GT2s and the turbos. They're just magical. And there is something quite special about the way that they sound. That gorgeous C63 there, that Burble's a beautiful V8 rumble. That is a crucial part of that car. What makes that car special? People go and buy these cars because they sound great, in addition to looking great and driving brilliantly. So I think it is going to be difficult. There's been an interesting topic and conversation that I've been having recently about the synthetic noises going into EVs, which I just think is ridiculous. Fake engine sounds coming out of the car with no engine at all, to me is a very, very bizarre thing. But clearly people out there are asking for it, because it's happening.
Well, they're asking for that exact reason, aren't they? Because they're missing it, and it's like, it's very, very boring.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, with this, I'm just thinking in the future, what we're going to do is our intro.
Yeah. Have to do car
have a Tesla spinning. We just get Joe to make a noise in the background. Just turn it on. But that's fantastic. But with hybrid and hydrogen, have you tested any hydrogen cars yet? Or?
No, I haven't. I'm yet to experience hydrogen. I feel like it's a really interesting topic. I'm a little concerned that ship has sailed, because I think it's all down to infrastructure, in the same way that we've got a long way to go as a country to get the country ready for EVs fully. Having enough places for people to charge, we're quite lucky, or I'm quite lucky where I live in leafy Warwickshire. houses can have their own charging points, and there aren't that many cars in accordance to the space. But if I go back to see my family in London, where suddenly every single person on the road's got at least one car and they're parked up on the streets, how do we get everyone to plug in? Hydrogen, I feel, is going to face a similar challenge, and it's probably a slightly larger challenge in that to store hydrogen, to put hydrogen into a filling station like we do with petrol or diesel, is going to involve a huge spend on having to dig up petrol station forecourts, have this storage unit. If you think about the time and the costs and the expense, and of course, again, the carbon spend in doing so is going to be huge. So I sadly think that for cars, certainly, hydrogen may be something that we walk away from. But I think for things like ships, which of course are currently using terrible heavy oils, and for trucks and lorries, I think that's the perfect solution, because that way, if your truck station's got a hydrogen tank on a service station that can convert hydrogen power into electricity that can then charge a motor, that works, I get that. And for a necessary utility vehicle, I think it makes perfect sense. But for cars, I haven't yet had the opportunity to drive one. Maybe I won't because of that reason.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's an interesting marketplace at the moment, because I'm kind of like, I've got my fingers crossed that hydrogen do make it through, because I prefer the hydrogen, the ability to refill on demand, which is, and I spoke to a few people and they said that the spend on the electric, like all the bays within a petrol station forecourt, and then all the like the grid changes they have to do and all the rest of it, and that you have to have something to entertain the people. Having to build a little coffee shop on the side of their shops and stuff, like they'd rather have a hydrogen tank stuck in. So
quite possibly. I mean, EVs will get better.
knows?
The charging times will get better. I'm sure. Again, think about how far we've come in the last 10 years. You think about how far we're going to go in the next 10. I think it will get better. I've seen some plans from the JLR group talking about a battery technology that could take as little as 15 minutes to charge in full, which of course that's a complete game changer in comparison to having to plug the car in overnight and get it going, or 2 hours on a fast charger. So if that sort of thing happens, then perhaps the world of EVs will get better. But then there's still that question of, is it fun? Is it dynamic? For us petrol heads, is that what we want? Maybe not.
Because I think that the Bentley's 6 3/4 litre would probably take 15 minutes to fill up anyway, wouldn't it?
It's quite a long process. You've also got to factor in the phone call to the bank manager to sort out the extended overdraft. Because
you just filled up like earlier that day. But I saw, just interesting, but I saw on that video that you did that you've been driving for 5.5 hours that day.
Yes.
How many fill-ups did you do in that miles?
There would have been at least 2, and it's a big tank in that. That can be an expensive one. When I'm filing the expenses at the end of the month and I'm writing on top of the receipts, Bentley.
You have to write it,
Bentley. It's like, oh God, that was an expensive one. People who are fortunate enough to be buying a car like that, I think perhaps fortunate enough not to have to worry about the petrol bill. But yes, that was an expensive one.
Well, I guess it's because they don't use it that much.
Perhaps.
They've got an electric car.
Maybe. They've got a Tesla instead.
That's it for their 30-mile trips. Brilliant. But obviously we've just come out the back of COVID, and hopefully it doesn't return and we're kind of through it. But the motor trade's obviously taken a few ups and downs, you could say. We've been right in the middle of it with our car sales department. But what have you seen? Because obviously with your work, with cars being launched, with car releases and stuff being delayed, and things like that, have you had an impact? Has there been an impact on your jobs?
Definitely, it's been really fascinating actually, because of course, as you say, throughout the pandemic, it was an interesting time for cars. Suddenly, used car prices went through the roof because everyone wanted to drive. It meant that even the larger dealership groups were then selling off cars that perhaps they otherwise wouldn't have been, but for a lot more money. And then, of course, there were people out there that still wanted to go and buy new cars, people that had the means to. But the pandemic threw up all sorts of different errors, didn't it? Things like the chip shortages, rubber shortages, wiring loom shortages. Of course, the war in Ukraine has caused a huge problem because a lot of wiring looms for the Volkswagen Group are made there. So suddenly there was this big delay, and I remember talking to friends of mine who worked for JLR, selling Range Rovers, saying that people are coming in to spec up their cars and then being told that it might be an 18-month, maybe 2 years, might be even 3 years to wait for a car to be put together because of the shortage of everything. From a car launch point of view, from a journalism point of view, again, it's been really interesting because, again, the car manufacturers are still wanting to sell their cars. They want the press to drive them. But again, the demand was so high for used cars that a lot of the press fleets started being sold off. So car manufacturers like Land Rover, for example, when they brought out their new Defender, we were very lucky. We had a press car at the end of 2020. Now, usually a press car will get given to you for a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and that's great because that you can allow a lot of time to film it, get all the content you need to get, write the reviews you need to write, get it out there, and then hopefully, of course, Land Rover then sells some cars. With the Defender at that time, they could only give it to us for 3 days because that was the cycle. They had such a small fleet of cars that every single journalist in the country wanted to drive it, and they were saying, look, we can give it to you for 3 days and that's it. Then it needs to go to the next journalist. So we saw a lot of that, and that's really difficult because, of course, you want to give a car the right justice. You want to be able to write an honest review, and sometimes 3 days doesn't quite cut it, unless you're doing a massive road trip and you can try and factor in lots of different elements of what it's like to drive a car. It's a difficult thing to do, and only now we're starting to get to a point where it is calming down again, and the press offices have got a full fleet again.
Yeah, no. So, like with everything that you've done so far, the thing that I found quite interesting, your stint or your job with TalkSport and on the radio.
Yeah.
So how did that kind of come about? Was it a motoring show on there, or?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've done 2 stints, funnily enough, on the radio. The first one was a bit of a fluke. A guy that I bumped into, crossed paths with at one point, was running a new radio show. It was a chap called Andy, and it was a car-based motor show on Talk Radio, and this would have been back in 2016. And at the time, that workshop, funnily enough, that I mentioned earlier, that I was doing some PR and brand management for in East London, they were given the opportunity to talk about their brand on the radio. Yeah. So I was put forward as the PR guy, brand manager, go and promote the company, put it on the radio show. It's exactly what I did. Went into the radio show, sat down and talked about the business that we were running. And then whilst I was there, the presenters and some of the producers in the studio said, "Oh, we've got a couple of news stories. Would you be able to give your opinion on them?" Which is exactly what I did. And it was something silly. It was like a Porsche had recalled some Cayenne products because of a little circlip in the pedal box. So I gave a little nothing statement about it. But the producer's ears picked up and said, "Oh, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Let's get him back next week," which is what happened. I came back the week after, and then I came back the week after and the week after. So for 2 years following that time, whilst doing everything else, I was suddenly a sidekick on the radio, doing a motoring radio show. So that was a bit of fun. Again, completely out of the blue. You'll notice there's a pattern with a lot of my accolades and the jobs that I've had that bring me income. No qualifications to do so. I certainly didn't ever plan on presenting. I'd never thought about training as a presenter or even being a voice of authority in the world of cars. But there I was on a radio show once a week, doing a live show on a Saturday afternoon. And that then that ran its course and fizzled out. But at the time that Driven was founded, so the brand, which of course I'm now looking after, that came up initially as a radio show with a spin-off podcast. As time's gone on, it's actually done a complete flip reverse. The show is now predominantly a podcast, and as a spin-off, I occasionally jump onto Talk Radio and Talk Sport. But we were a radio show for a couple of years on Talk Sport and on Talk Radio, which involved going down to the studios in London at the Shard, which was very exciting. And again, there's a lot of pinch myself moments. I'm a big sufferer of imposter syndrome, where I'm suddenly sat in environments where I'm thinking, what on earth am I doing here?
How did I get here?
So that has happened. But yes, so no radio show at the moment. It is just the podcast, but occasionally I'll get called up, usually on a Saturday morning, from a producer in a TalkSport studio going, right, we've got to run a story about this. Or Talk Radio, there's a car news story that needs an expert, in inverted commas, and I'm often the expert, so I'll pop on to do either a Zoom link, or I'll pop into the studio and sit down with Trisha Goddard or somebody like that to talk about the world of cars.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So it's been a great experience, and
absolutely
enjoyed it.
Yeah. And again, it's like I said, it's a world I never thought I'd get involved in. It wasn't even on my radar. But the opportunities come up, met the right people at the right times, and just had an interest, and there we go. Yeah, still at it now. Who knows what the future will hold? Maybe there'll be more radio stuff in the future. Maybe there'll be some telly stuff. Keeping all the options open, we'll see.
It sounds like you've just gone from position to position through your network, meeting new people, developing relationships, and
absolutely, that's it. That is the secret. For me, it's been a networking process. We are so lucky, and this is something I say time and time again on our podcast, is that the automotive industry is an industry built on people that love cars and motorbikes, and it's as simple as that. And that means that from anyone that's, you know, a tyre fitter in your local Railway Arches garage through to the managing director of Bugatti, they're in their job because they like cars. And once you learn that, once you realise that, you then realise that you can basically strike up a conversation with anyone on any level because you talk about cars.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know the guys that run Cafe in a Machine really well. I help them with a lot of their early events. And that's a perfect example where you can see a guy turn up in a Vauxhall Nova and a girl will turn up in a top of the range Ferrari, and the two will talk for no other reason other than the fact that they both like cars. That's why they're there. So for me, every single chapter of my career has happened as a result of liking cars and wanting to have an interest in cars and just sharing that passion with other people. So all the doors that have opened for me opportunity-wise, career-wise, have happened because of that common interest, which is really special.
Yeah, fantastic. That's brilliant. So with the way that your career's developed and everything, obviously social media's become more and more of a thing, you know. Have you found that since obviously the explosion of social media, your job's become easier, or you've made more connections, or?
That's a really good question, because I have a love-hate relationship with social media. There are days where I just wish I could turn it off and walk away from it, because it's hard work. You know, to stay relevant on the various platforms, you've got to keep feeding this big machine that nobody really understands, this algorithm that's always changing. Then it's got to the point now, YouTube is a perfect example. Nobody at Google can tell you how the YouTube algorithm works. It's completely AI. It's learned itself what people like, and it makes adaptations. So there's no way of knowing. And I'm sure Instagram and Facebook, they're not far behind, TikTok as well. So social media, yes, in some instances it has helped. It's been a great way for me to meet new people. It has provided job opportunities. Again, people have seen what I do through social media clips from longer videos. It's resulted in subscribers on our YouTube channel as they've seen clips on TikTok. It works, you know, it does certainly serve a purpose, but as I say, there are times where I think, I wish it was simpler. I feel that as many of us do in the automotive space, maybe it would have been more interesting and more dynamic to do the jobs we're doing 20 or 30 years ago in comparison to now, because of course we're all competing with each other, but at the same time trying to encourage each other, and everyone, you know, the access that people have got now to camera equipment, to video equipment, to cars, it's a lot easier now to create content. So therefore a lot of people are doing it, and that's brilliant. And I would, you know, encourage everybody to have a go at it, because it's brilliant fun. But yes, it has definitely helped from a career point of view, but at the same time, I feel that perhaps the integrity of a lot of motoring journalists or content creators or media creators, sometimes I feel like there's some really, really brilliant talent out there that aren't quite getting the look in that perhaps they deserve, because there's somebody out there with a bigger and better camera setup, the ability to film more exciting cars, and that I find can make it sometimes difficult. But on the whole, it's a good thing for me, and it's been a great thing for my career.
Fantastic. I completely agree with everything you say. It's been, look at us here today.
Yeah,
look at
absolutely.
us creating this content, and I've got to meet yourself, and without this, if we weren't doing this, we were just selling cars and fixing cars all day long. I'd just be stuck in my office, really.
Well, so, glad to pull you out of the office. Absolutely.
Exactly. I'm not handcuffed to my office anymore, so on my desk. No, it's brilliant. So you mentioned it a few times, but you cover cars and motorbikes.
Yeah.
And I did miss a question earlier, because I was going to ask you earlier, but 4 wheels or 2?
It's a really, really, really difficult one. It changes on a daily basis. Today, 4, because it's pouring with rain outside. I'm definitely a fair weather fairy when it comes to riding motorbikes. But yeah, I was quite late to the whole motorbike thing. I started out with cars. I had no interest in motorbikes. When I first started driving, I just couldn't think of anything worse than putting myself on top of an engine and riding down the road. It wasn't until I got to my late 20s, I was about 28, 29, and I realised that I didn't know how a motorbike worked, and that really bothered me. So I went and got my CBT, I went and got my bigger licence, and I'll be completely honest with you, I passed my test, bought myself a Ducati Monster, which was, in hindsight, a terrible idea as a first bike. But I wanted the red Ducati, as we all do as children. And for the for about 6 weeks, I thought, I really hate this. I really don't like it. I felt so vulnerable. I felt like I was constantly on the verge of having a big accident, and not necessarily because I was riding like an idiot, but because of other road users. And suddenly you start rehearing all those conversations that you hear from your parents and your grandparents and your aunties and your uncles saying, whatever you do, don't do motorbikes. But I remember one bit of advice that was given to me not long after I passed my driver's test, and I guess it was a conversation about motorbikes, so I would have been 17, 18. And it was a friend of mine's dad that said, if you're going to learn the road, promise me you'll never learn the road on a motorbike. Learn the roads in a car first, and then if the time comes where you want to learn how to ride a motorbike, do. And that is brilliant advice, because it's so true. And I'm not going to say to anyone, don't go ride a motorbike at a young age, but do so with caution and learn and understand that there is a huge process to it. It's a completely different skill set to driving a car. So once I got over that initial kind of 6 weeks of doubt, going, I don't know if this is for me, and maybe I'll pop this thing on eBay and get it sold. Again, something just clicked one day. I took my old Ducati for a ride around Warwickshire, and it all just came together. The weather was beautiful. I suddenly felt more confident with the bike. I'd learnt what I needed to do to get the best out of the bike and feel safe and competent. And from that minute onwards, I was hooked. So you're right, it is quite strange to get an overlap of motoring journalists that will do a bit of both. They're either just bikes or they're just cars. But yeah, I get to do both. And that has resulted in some great adventures. I did a road trip around Scotland last year, around the Highlands with Royal Enfield. Awesome. I've got a Triumph 1200 twin being delivered to me next week, which I'll be taking on the Distinguished Gentleman's Charity Ride in London. It is a fantastic world. I'm so glad I've got into it, and I do love bikes, but I think my core love for the automotive world is always going to be four wheels. Yeah,
brilliant. Right answer. I'm not ever going to touch two wheels because I think I'd get addicted to, I just want to get the fastest one.
Yes.
Because they're quite accessible, aren't they?
They are, that's the thing. Yeah, you look at the comparison of fast cars versus fast bikes, for 30 to 40,000 pounds, which is still a lot of money, you can get the best of the best when it comes to fast superbikes. Look for the best of the best equivalent of cars, you're looking at millions of pounds.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is a lot more accessible to get that sort of power, and you're right, there's definitely a lot more risk involved, there's that temptation to push on. But it's, again, until you try it, it's a difficult one. I work on the notion of anyone that's cautious about it. I often find, friends of mine that don't ride motorcycles, and they say, oh God, I'd never do that because I'd end up hurting myself. And I always say, well, if that's the mentality you've got, that's actually the better way to be. It's the day you get on the bike and think nothing will ever happen. That's when something's likely to go wrong. It's a bit like the old timing yourself on a track day. The minute you set the stopwatch, you are setting yourself up for a disaster. Just go and enjoy it. Enjoy the drive, enjoy the ride. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. You've been fortunate and lucky enough to get the car you've always wanted or the bike you've always wanted. Just enjoy it. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, take it to your limit.
Absolutely right.
Obviously time limits or the vehicle, the actual vehicle's limit.
Yeah,
definitely. I agree with that. So, for all the listeners and viewers out there, because obviously you're a very established and acclaimed journalist within the automotive industry, is there any tips that you give anyone like looking to do the same thing? Or
definitely, yeah. Again, the imposter syndrome is kicking in there with acclaimed motoring journalist. Because I feel I need to remind people that I didn't go to university. I walked out of college. Through frustration of not knowing what I wanted to do. I have no qualifications to do anything that I'm doing right now from a education point of view, none. And that might make a few ears prick up and might raise a few eyebrows. But the truth is, everything that I've achieved in my career, from a media point of view to an events point of view to a presenting point of view, has been a result of just having a go. And there is some natural talent required. Be under no illusion. Everyone can't just go and get their dream job and be brilliant at it. You have to practice, you have to try, you have to see what works for you and see what doesn't. If I could turn back the clock, would I change things, and would I have gone down the route of perhaps getting a journalism degree or an event management degree? I don't know if I would, now that I've lived the life that I have, because everything that I've had opportunity-wise passed to me has been given as a result of meeting the right people at the right time, and crucially, having an interest. So the advice is network. And again, remember that rule on Everyone in this industry is in it because they love it, and that is the most powerful thing that you can take with you, because if you want to excel in this world, if you want to excel in the world of cars, and that could be anything from a media career through to selling cars, through to customizing cars, through to working on cars, through to racing cars, if you want to get into it, the way that you've got to do it is by meeting the right people, networking and pushing yourself forward, and putting yourself into situations that perhaps are a bit uncomfortable. You know, get out of the comfort zone, do something that is a bit scary from time to time. Make a phone call or send a direct message to somebody on Instagram that perhaps you wouldn't normally do, to ask if there's an opportunity, ask if there's advice. People are always happy to help each other out, and anyone that isn't worth knowing. That's definitely something to take on board. If you've got the passion, if you've got the interest, and maybe you don't quite know where to start talking to people, start building up conversations, and you'll be amazed how quickly it happens. So the advice is to network, network, and network. If there's a particular field that you want to focus on, be that journalism or writing or presenting, just go and do it. Practice, borrow a car, borrow a friend's car, get yourself insured for a day and write a review about it. Then send that review to a motoring journalist and say, have you got 10 minutes to look at this, see what you think? Write your article, leave it for a week, come back and read it a week later. And if it still looks half decent, then perhaps it is. You know, you might look at it a week later and go, God, that's a load of tosh. And if it is, then you'll learn from it and you'll work harder on that. The same with presenting. If you want to present. Go and film yourself. You know, everyone has access to cameras now. We've got phones that have better cameras than SLRs have been for the last 25 years. Go and film yourself. Go and do something dynamic. It's worth just having a go. And the difficult bit is when it comes to showing other people. But once you've mastered that, and once you're happy and you're confident with what you've created, go and share it. And the worst thing that's going to happen is somebody might have a bit of a giggle and go, well, I don't think that's for you. And if that's it, then that's it, but you've had a go.
It's so true, because we're doing this today.
Yeah.
And even a year ago, if it had said, are you going to get people in, you're going to be interviewing and stuff, I would have been like, me? No. And then the guys made me do it, made me try. We got a few people in, obviously. Yeah. And it's like you were saying a minute ago about reaching out. We've reached out to yourself. Yeah. And thank you so much. You've come down today, and it's been really, really great to meet you.
Pleasure. Yeah.
But this has been a really good experience, and this came from reaching out and stepping out of our comfort zone, stepping out of our environment, and trying to get an insight from someone else who's doing a lot more other things in the industry. So no, it's definitely really, really good advice. So. No, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, as I said, and it's hopefully see you again soon.
No doubt. Yeah, see you around.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today and for watching our interview. Don't forget, you can see a lot more content like this with far more interesting people than me, I'm sure, coming up in the near future. So do subscribe to MotorServ-TV, have a look at the social feeds, and stay tuned to see who's next. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
So thanks very much everyone for watching and listening today. That was episode 4 of MotorServ-TV. Please do follow, like and share our channel, and hopefully see you on the next one.